Welcome to Kiki's Chat Show. Today is a very interesting day. We're talking about change. We're talking about life. We're talking about who we are. We're talking about finding ourselves. And the biggest thing we're talking about is a book called The Sciences of Change. It's a biography by my guest, who is the author. And we're going to talk about him, his life, his achievements, and all of the things he's done so far, and why he made drastic changes by the time he was 38. And this is somebody who I view as a high flyer, somebody who's doing really well in his life, and somebody who we all need to listen to, because there are bits in his life that resonates with all of us, especially us from the diaspora, us Black people, us people of color who are in a foreign land. Either you were dragged kicking and screaming into this foreign land, or you have found yourself here for whatever reason, and how you feel, where you are placed in this strange jigsaw, how you feel, how you're moving, and how you feel appreciated. Welcome to the show, Ian Clarke.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Kiki. I've been so excited for this.
Amazing. Oh, it's a pleasure. Now, let me tell you about Ian Clarke before we start. He's a 10 times world record holder with 13 awards for excellence in driving change. Ian is 38, as I said earlier. He's an author, an entrepreneur, equality campaigner, and humanist. In 2021, he sacrificed his 14-year financial services leadership career across 2 continents to take a stand against institutionalized hatred and oppression. Amid global press coverage, his dramatic exit yielded the first Black female board director in investment banking history. Today, he's pioneering a new global industry in his firm, the Delightful Group, a change engine anchored in quantum mechanics. His new book, The Sciences of Change, explains how it works and provides a batch of changes as proof of concept. Now, people, it is a lot of words, but I hope you understood that. The basic thing is he was working 14 years with HSBC. And then he suddenly had an epiphany and he left. But he left because of reasons which he's going to explain to us, and we're going to talk about it from there. Now, Ian is not different from a lot of young men and women who are going through all sorts of experiences, which is making them wonder whether they're at the right place, whether they're in the right job, whether they're appreciated. A lot of young men are committing suicide. And it's something which worries me a lot. One advice I will give to parents, even before I start this conversation, is, what do you want? Do you want a living child who is happy, well-rounded? Or do you want to hold your handkerchief and weep while holding his photo? This is for you to ponder about while we have this conversation. But my first question to you, Ian, after all of this drama that I've just spewed out, is, can you tell me a little bit, just a little bit, a synopsis of your work with HSBC?
Sure. So I joined the bank in 2014 2011 as an executive management trainee. So that was the top flight top flight graduate scheme in the UK, and it was designed to train the future leaders of the bank. 6 years, they said, from entrance to senior leadership was the target. And that program took me to every single division of the bank. So retail banking, commercial banking, credit and risk, strategy, leadership. And but despite everything, a top-rated graduate, outstanding achievement awards. You know, I was the guy that showed up at the front door to greet new graduates every year to the bank. Despite all that, I was never allowed in senior leadership, and I spent at least a half of my 14-year career in the bank in the frozen middle, which is the layer just below senior leadership that traps so many people, particularly people with difference. So by that I mean that's people who are racially, sexually, or genderly diverse, such as women or black people. So it's you know, and no one ever says, you know, oh, it's because you're black or a woman or queer or whatever. But you know, because you look on the numbers and you see the people surpassing you, and you know they're all look and sound the same. So I did every job in the bank over the course of the 14 years, which took me to New York City. I spent the last 4 years, and that was when George Floyd happened, and that was when I realised there was just no way they were ever going to let me into senior leadership, no matter what I did. And then then became right. What's the exit strategy?
I see. So it was George Floyd was the trigger point then.
Consider that money has a reputation of being the root of all evil, and it doesn't, you know, take a banker's mind to understand that surely a lot of the repression and hatred we all face in the world today stems from greed. It's just an assumption we all make, and it seems to make sense. So I joined banking perhaps slightly differently to most people. I didn't join it to become rich. I joined it to try and figure out the workings of hatred and money and greed. So I saw it as more of a scientific experiment, and because of that, I behaved differently from the start, and I stood out. And actually, the approach I had helped me top the sales charts consistently, because I wasn't trying to make money; I was trying to help solve problems for people. So once I realised the original plan was to make CEO on merit, and was a bit ambitious, and then try and fix the glaring issues with banking that is making it unsustainable. But after George Floyd, that became impossible. The levels of hatred and oppression espousing from and within the bank soared considerably, as I think they have done in all corners of society, frankly. You only need to look at what's happening outside the Planalto Palace, Brazil, earlier this year, or Capitol Hill last year in the USA. You know, riots for elections. We've never had that before in history, recorded history anyway. So with things, the world is getting darker. The question is why?
The world is definitely getting darker. It is definitely getting darker. So there was a lot of drama around your leaving HSBC. Do you want to talk about it?
So I set about, as part of my capacity as a leader, if not in title and salary, certainly in job description. So I was on the executive committee for 3 staff networks. I was founder of 4 staff networks or diversity inclusion groups. And I had a duty of care to 12,000 staff through that. I was doing things like co-head of World Pride Comms in New York City. I was the head of governance for the LGBT employee network, and I was one of the lead speakers for the women's network, because I'm a genuine ally to women. So there was a lot I was doing, and none of that was my day job. I was the most senior banker assigned to the Fortune 500 group of companies. They're responsible for their relationship management and latterly their transaction banking solution. So I was a fixer and a doer, and I took it upon myself in that capacity to interview 100 staff and colleagues to understand, past and present, from all walks of life, to understand what their experiences were. And it was just horrific. All of them reported constant abuse for who they were, being told things like, it's never been such a hard time as it is today being a white man in banking, to the only black woman in the entire global sales team was told that. This perception that is so selfish by some, because they're not fast tracked to the top like they used to be for their skin color, is bonkers. So I wrote a report called Project Speak Up that brought to life those accounts, and it also juxtaposed them with real data and evidence of the impact of this on our financial results, on our employee well-being, on our demographics, and it found that we were in terminal decline as a bank. And that's playing out. HSBC was the world's number one bank when I joined. It's now barely in the top 10. And that's, so it's also self-defeating too. And the senior leadership didn't like that I'd written this before, obviously. Probably something to do with the fact they end up in the TV in 120 countries. So that was really it for me. I hoped that they would listen to the advice. I don't just criticize. It had 12 recommendations in it, all free, that if they'd implemented them would have made them number one bank again. But they chose not to. So that tells you everything you need to know about whether they want to change or not.
I did read your recommendations because it was in the financial. It was in the New York Times. It was in another quite a huge newspaper, and it was all over the internet. And it was in Banking Times or Banking something.
It was my friend messaged me. He worked for, I think, a Clifford Chance in New York City. They were all in these big banks and law firms. They had TVs on the wall, and he sent me a picture. Your picture's on my wall in the office. Why? It was people all over the world were messaging me, going, "Oh, I'm seeing you on TV." It really did kick up quite a fuss. I got hundreds of messages of support from all around the world of people who were going through the same thing. And for me, what it was a galvanizing moment, because it helped people realize they're not on their own. So often we hear you're not the right person for the job, or there's something just not quite right about you, and we take it deeply personally. But actually we shouldn't, because it's nothing, no reflection on us. Everyone is hearing that. It's so consistent, and therefore we should really try and work this out together. So the message from Speak Up was, no, you're not alone.
No, you're not alone. And I can tell you, really, it's happening. Even unions, some unions, and I'm not saying all unions, because there are really some good unions around, who are arguing for their members to be treated in a certain way in work and to be those unions are quite draconian to their staff. And they do the same things. They're not even allowing, for example, I know a company where they advertised for a Black person to look after Black members and to be, to organize Black members and meetings, etc., etc. And it's a bit like middle management sort of job. And a lot of people, Black people, applied for it. All the Black people were refused even an interview because they didn't have a driving license. Now, this job is in London. And London, at the moment, there's nowhere to park. There's nowhere to drive to. There's so much public transport. They're talking about the greenhouse effect. We're talking about global warming. They're trying to get people to stop driving. So what was that about?
There's so many requirements for jobs that are superfluous, that they really mean nothing. One of the requirements for my job was, when I was in banking, was it's called a certificate of professional standing from the London Institute of Banking and Finance. Every single senior banker in London has one, and it's a piece of paper that tells everyone that you're a fine, upstanding citizen. You'll never do any wrong to anyone. And quite clearly, it is worthless, a piece of paper. It means nothing. Its sole purpose is to inflate the ego and status of those that have it, so that they can, as a cover for them to be able to commit any crime they want without any consequences. So I really think that if you want some stuff, if you want a lorry driver, ask for a driving license. If you want a banker, ask for someone that isn't a complete criminal, but don't make stuff up that isn't relevant just so that you can discount people that are totally fine for the job. Simple.
I agree. If you want a lorry driver, ask for a driving license. But, we all go to meetings on transport, on public transport, or I can find my way to wherever I want to go. It's none of your business.
Yeah, I'll be there.
If I have a problem, I'll let you know. But, to stop people just because they don't have a full driving license, it's like a slap in the face, really.
Yeah. Anyway. Often it's technicalities to excuse the real reason that we don't get the job.
Yeah.
Well, we want someone who's Black to look after the Black people. Oh, but we don't want to give it to you because you're Black. So we're going to say that, blame the driving license.
Yeah. Anyway, so coming back to our discussion, what did your parents and friends and family, what did they think about you just abruptly leaving your prestigious job, seemingly prestigious job. And, because you'd been moved from London to New York, you were doing really well. You had an apartment in one of the posh areas. You were doing nice things with your job. You were even buying your auntie's perfumes and things when you were coming down for holidays. What did they think?
I mean, it was people knew I was up to something, but I don't think they really realised how. I'm a really thorough guy. I have a very analytical mind, and I also can see, I can join connections between things that perhaps not everyone can, because at least being a banker and being a generalist banker as well meant that I understood how the bank works holistically, which very few people in banking do. Most people are in silos in banking, so I can see what's happening. And I know that in a world where hatred is getting worse and it's getting darker, people who suffer from hatred, and this is proven in science, don't have no concept of hatred. They don't have a concept of it. So if you say, "Are you suffering from hatred?" they'll say, "No, everything's fine. You're suffering from hatred." People who aren't suffering from hatred, such as yourself, who's spreading light and love, you're not suffering from hatred. Therefore, you don't need to pay any attention to it either. So no one's paying any attention to hatred. You've got the deniers, and then you've got the people who aren't contributing to the problem. And I understand, and you understand, if things are getting darker, it's going to keep getting worse and worse and worse until it ends. So someone needs to do something to counterweight, right? Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. There was no reaction to George Floyd murder. No, there was no, this guy, the policeman who ended up in jail, only kicking and screaming, did they actually arrest him in the end because of the public outcry? But that's not going to offset the harm and damage that's done to our identity as a human identity. We need to grab that pendulum of doom and swing it back as far as possible, if we want the world to become better rather than worse over the next few years. And that was really what I was trying to do. I was trying to level the playing field for some folks. And I succeeded. As you pointed out, one of the 7 world records from Project Speak Up was the first Black female board appointment in global banking history. And I'm proud of that. But also I'm shocked and saddened that it's taken this 450-year-old industry 450 years to produce a first Black female board appointment, and only because, unwillingly, reluctantly so as well. It really shows you, as the Financial Conduct Authority said in their response to my report, it proves institutionalized racism within what is still Europe's largest bank. And yet there were no consequences from that, certainly no regulatory or government consequences, that's for sure.
So what are you up to now?
So I after banking, I applied for every major banking consultancy in the world, and I didn't even get offered an interview. I even applied for analyst roles, which as a vice president in title and a senior vice president in job role was a shock to me. I'm now unemployable. But I think it was a bit of a blessing. I don't think I could have ever gone into a bank again after that anyway. It was more just a test. So I started up my own firm, called Daylight Consulting, or the Delightful Group now. And initially we were a D&I consultancy, but I never really believed in D&I. I wanted to understand why D&I, so D&I is diversity inclusion, sorry about the acronym. And that is really sort of the corporate's response to this issue, this darkness around us. The challenge with diversity inclusion is that it's not authentic. People just sit around talking about acronyms all the time. Should we call it DE&I? Or Jedi or whatever, and sometimes they might pull a panel together to discuss what acronym they're going to use next, but they never really get to the real heart of the problem, which I think is what you're trying to do with shows like this, Kiki. And I mentioned before, being uncomfortable drives change. You have to get people uncomfortable. You cannot have a bunch of yes men on a stage telling everyone how wonderful things are when they clearly are not. That won't drive change. So my firm it's called a change engine. It's a brand new industry, and we set up on the premise that if you think of these people a bit like dictators, right? The C-suites and the boards of the FTSE 100 and the Fortune 500 and governments, they are not going to change. They have the power. There's no reason they are ever going to let Black people come in the room or women come in the room. Then why would they do that? It is against their own interests. And if they were going to do it, they would have done it 15 years ago when 7 years ago, when McKinsey produced the Diversity Matters report that proved that provided a triple lock. Provide a triple lock of a legal, moral, and financial case for diversity inclusion, and yet nothing changed. That tells you all you need to know about them. They will never change. They are dictators, effectively sat there, responsible for the problems we are in. So we need to change them. We need to do it unilaterally, and that's what my firm is attempting to do. So it's anchored in quantum mechanics. So it's quite leading edge science, but this science tells us that we should be, in theory, able to change anything using science. After all, that is what science is all about. The Earth revolves around the sun. Who can argue with that? Science.
So do you have lawyers as well in your in the Delight consultancy? Do you have lawyers, people who know the law, who could help someone? If someone, for example, if someone was working somewhere where they felt that they were being there was sexism, racism, homophobia, etc. going on, and they could prove that they were being maltreated, would you be able to help them and legally help them go to court?
So the sad answer is actually that the legal system is broken. For example, the statute of limitation for a breach in civil law, of which it sounds like the example you gave would be a breach in civil law, i.e. a hate crime, and it would also be discrimination in the workplace. And ultimately, that would go through ACAS if it were here in the UK. And their statute of limitation is 3 months. Report it within 3 months or it's dismissed. So all that your company needs to do is keep it quiet for 3 months, or you to hesitate for 3 months, and you can never take action against that. The other big problem from that is that it makes courts only look at discrete cases. Oh, someone called in the M-bomb in the lift. Okay, well, we'll look at that, right? You've got £1,000 compensation and you've lost your job. But if you look over a career, for example, which was what I was arguing with my case, 14 crimes over 15 crimes over 14 years by 21 people. Now you're starting to see a picture of what a real human being is going through in one of these big institutions. It is a big picture, and the law cannot pick it up currently. It's misconfigured. So that's why we're seeing conviction rates that are so low. The payouts are not worth the effort or the trauma of going through the court process. Set up to fail, unfortunately.
That is sad, because it means this is an indictment of the whole legal process, because it means that a lot of people, and I know that a lot of Black people, for example, even if they're being treated racist, if they're being treated badly at work, or they're being there's this word, they would not report it because they don't think that they will be believed. One, two, I mean, look at McDonald's. There's a case in the news at the moment about girls being picked on by the older guys, being sexually assaulted, and they could not report it because even if they did, nothing would happen. And so management, and sometimes you are reporting somebody who is on a higher level than you, and so they know the bosses who's going to deal with this. HR know the people maltreating you. They take the side of the person, and then you're out.
And it's actually universal what you're describing. HR will always side with the most senior leader, and they cite reputational risk for doing so. This person is paid more, therefore they are presumably worth more, forgetting entirely that all humans are equal under the Human Genome Project found that. So if you do report it, you will probably lose your job, and you will probably end up worse for wear from it. So it is so predictable across companies. Unfortunately, that is the case. If they can't take responsibility when things go wrong, and they can't put it right or take ownership when they mess up, why are they paid such a high salary? What are these leaders doing? Nothing.
I know. And most of the time, it's the lower grades who do most of the physical work, and the higher grades are sitting there just being mean. I mean, this is where that statement, power corrupts absolutely, or absolute power corrupts. And
power and control. I firmly believe no human sets out to be a bad person. We reflect our environment and the social construction around us. And in nowhere is social construction more overwhelming than in big business. There are so many things there, from CEO to titles, the suits you wear that anonymize your identity, the repetitiveness of these banks of desks that are grey with no individuality to them. It's all designed to strip you of your identity. And as the Stanford prison experiments of the 1970s found, once you strip someone of their identity, they no longer, and you apply power and control, they no longer identify as human, but they suffer from this anonymity bias, and they view anyone else as an enemy, and it manifests sadomasochistic tendencies. I do think that we have built a society that is making even the best of us potentially turn quite nasty.
And I agree. What I wanted to say was absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's what I wanted to say. I was trying to play with it in my mind while listening to you.
I like the play on words. I might pinch that for my next book. I hope I have to write another one too soon. This one's taken me 6 months, 19 hours a day it took me to write this book. But we in the legacy of Project Speak Up, it's full of solutions, not just it's not just criticism, or it's full of data, it's full of science, it's full of solutions. And actually, if it reaches critical mass of circulation, I think the solutions will implement themselves, because people will seize on them and they will see them through, as they did with Project Speak Up. It wasn't me who took those 7 world records over the final hurdle of the line. It was those I left behind who did so courageously and dutifully. So I really think that this book has the potential to save life. A lot of people write books to self-promote. A lot of people write books to get established. Or this book is very purposeful, and it works through step by step, trying to rebuild human identity, because it's not defined today. So we've looked in unusual places for clues on what true human identity can be, like humanity's relationship with the moon or the universe, or different parts of the world. So we looked at what's going on in North Korea and the Korean Peninsula at large, looked at Iran and the nature of Iran, to try and piece together the forgotten history of these places, to see if we can then use that to reconstruct how human identity has changed over time and what's brought us here, so that we can isolate the causes of hatred and oppression. No one's done that before. And this book, I believe, establishes those causes. The potential to save life and change the world is immense if people give it a try.
Well, I was reading parts of your book, and there was something you said which was a little bit disconcerting. I'm going to find it in a minute.
No sneaking ahead. It only just came out. It is
No, you said something. You did say race discrimination cases spiked 50% during the pandemic, and nobody, and yet nothing has come out of it. Now, this was written in the Financial News. So I'm interested in the race side of things. And then, a banker behind report alleging HSBC racism resigns over lack of support. That was you, wasn't it?
Yeah. I hope I did the hard bit. I wrote the report, gathered all the data, did the interviews. What I really hoped that people would see, Ian's written this report full of truth. Right, this is our time. Let's do it. Let's change the bank. Let's seize this moment. They didn't. And if there wasn't the support to do so, to save the future of our firm and make it an equitable place for everyone, then what the hell am I doing here? All this work for, to save this bank that doesn't want to be saved. So at that point, I realised I just need to resign then, and it would be safer, and I can make more of an impact outside the bank. Plus, I had enough messages from around the world to realise it wasn't just a problem with HSBC; it was a problem with all big institutions.
Oh yes, it's a problem with all institutions. I mean, you did quote Churchill to say to improve is to change, and to be perfect is to change often.
I love that quote. I love that quote because it really, I think it really, I wondered what to call the book for a while. Initially I was going to call it The Human Experience, but I think there's another book with that title. And actually the thing that really got me with Project Speak Up is perhaps for the first time in recent history anyway, a discrete finite timeline of how someone has changed the future using the power of their mind to deliver 7 world records. And it's very rare that we have an example of that with just one person. So normally we have a team or a company or whatever. So this gives us an opportunity to then dissect it as a science. Humans create change, clearly. It's something we can do. All of us are doing it now with this show. But how do we do that? How does that work as a science? And that's really what the book, so we've tried to deconstruct Project Speak Up, turn it into a science, and then scale it up. And that's what the book explains how that works. It's this missing science. And I hope in time it will become to be a discovery of monumental proportions as well. This, in theory, allows us, as I said, to change anything. But to not change is to be as far imperfect as you could possibly be, rigid, unchangeable people, like such the ones I work with in banking, are as far from perfect as any human could possibly be. And they're an anomaly. It's not to be rigid and uncompromising is not sustainable in human identity.
But how much change can you see? Sometimes to change, to go too far out is dangerous, because then people would argue that you are moving far ahead of your time and they're not ready yet, and therefore they can't identify with your drastic change. And yet even a little change could cause an uproar.
I mean, I think by comparison, Project Speak Up was a very little change, and not only that, but it was actually intended to make the HSBC the most successful bank in the world again. So it was in the interest of the people that ultimately turned against it. So if they're not comfortable with that change, they're definitely not going to be comfortable with this one. But who cares? I've done it now.
Change is change. One of the things which, as I was looking, because I didn't have enough time to read your book before this interview, but I was looking through it, and a thought came to me, which was, our lives at this moment is like a scientific experiment already. We are being manipulated by other people. A lot of our, it's what you just described about desks in banks and how people are made to dress up in a certain way, how people are, in fact, everything is engineered. Even the food we eat is advertised in such a way that it would attract you to eat, even if it was poison. Even if the medicine we take is attracted to us, we are already a scientific experiment. So if you are trying to get us to have a scientific change, is that not too much for normal human people to deal with?
So today, human identity hasn't been defined. Today, we haven't got an explanation for how it is that we exist. There is not even a hypothesis for how we exist. And there also isn't a hypothesis on the origins of hatred and oppression. But does that mean that there isn't an origin of hatred and oppression? Does it mean that there wasn't something in science that caused us to exist? No, there is missing science. And science, maybe we haven't discovered it yet, but you cannot pretend it doesn't exist. And once we find those things, as I believe this book identifies the source of the hatred and oppression, once that science is identified, unfortunately, that does crystallize then a liability on the sources of that hatred and oppression. We are doing no one any favors by ignoring the science, because we're just going to push the problem down the road.
Somebody's asking whether is banking rigid. I thought they are now changing too fast.
I mean, the change is superficial, in my opinion. If you look at all banks, certainly the big 5 banks in the UK, are changing slower now than they were 5 years ago in terms of their gender balance. All of them, Barclays, for example, has missed all its targets since 2016. Santander and Lloyds have missed their last targets in 2021, and they look on track to miss their targets in 2025, 26. The only bank that is even halfway to their target is HSBC. And I wonder why that is.
Halfway to their targets.
So they're the only bank which is, if you take where they are now to gender parity as 100%, then HSBC is the only bank that is halfway there.
Now, when we talk about change, you're talking about towards staff, towards race, towards sexism, towards equality, towards, those are the changes you're thinking of. Because I think that the questioner, the listener, is talking about banking practices. For example, I went to the bank today and I had some money and I wanted to put it in my account. And I was I was in a queue, and the woman came and said, "Oh, no, you can use the machine to do this." And, there are new machines. And I said, "No, I want to go the usual way, the old way. I'm an old woman, so I want to hand it to someone, make sure they put it in there and get my receipt." And she said, "No, come, I'll show you." So we go to the machine. She puts the money in. All of the money, she just takes the money from me, puts it in, and it counted it to the last pound.
Yeah,
And then I was shocked.
The worst machines in those ones. They fill up so quickly with coins. You have to change them every few hours. But they are, honestly, they're great, those machines. They've taken a job that used to take me, quite best part of an hour. They do it in seconds. Fantastic technology. But technology, I'll give it to banks. They're quite good at adopting, certainly in retail banking, new technology. And if you go into a retail branch today versus 10, 15 years ago, the experience is phenomenally better than it ever was. People often say, "I don't want to use the express banking machine. I want to queue up in the," but they forget, the queue used to go out the door for paying in checks in banks 20 years ago. Yeah. Today, it's a very simple digital process.
Yes, digital. But the other thing, though, is most of the banks around me are closed. So I had to drive further down away from my area to go to the bank. Now, a lot of banks are closing down or closing earlier. Before you could be banking up till about 5 o'clock. Now it's 3 o'clock. Mm-hmm. Now there are no banks in some of the areas, that sort of thing. So banking is changing, but the attitudes of staff, management within the banks is what we're talking about today, isn't that?
So there's a few issues here. So a lot of some customers also struggle to change. So banks are, in one hand, saying that we don't want to change on the internal equality stuff, but then they're also saying we really want customers to change and use digital services to reduce our costs. We're going to close all the branches. So they're sort of picking and choosing which type of change they're comfortable with. But I do think that this rigidity manifests well beyond banking to every aspect of life. So some people are dehumanizing more than others. You can't change them, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think we've answered the listener's question. Let's talk about we've talked about your book in a way, but do you want to give me a kind of a synopsis of your book? Because I think that your book is very real. I mean, one thing that struck me is your life story was in it, your progress, the things that you've done so far, your views, the reason for your change. I want to talk about, and I want people to buy your book because I think that there's a lot in your book that is people will relate to.
It's a book for real people, and it's got. So I started trying to write. I left my career in banking, determined to get to the bottom of what was happening. Why is the world getting darker? Why is D&I not working? How do we fix it? And that determination is something that human determination has brought us so far. So I really value it in these things that I value in people that I try and role model from others. And instill in myself, and I was going to get to the bottom of it, come rain or shine. And this book, I think it does it once people give it a try. There's a little bit in there about my story to contextualize why I'm talking about this. As much as my label said I was a banker, I've always had a real fascination with space. And as a hobbying cosmologist, I never thought I'd get to apply it. Certainly didn't in banking, but now I can. So there's a lot in there about space and about humankind's relationship with space. There's stuff in there on art, the art of change, looks at art over the ages and what it can tell us about changing human identity over time. There's there's some corporate stuff in there. So I've looked at we've benchmarked the big 5 banks against their commitments to equality, and we've analysed that in detail to see what information we can draw about how authentic they are about those targets and how likely they are to meet them, which I alluded to earlier on. There's also in there there's some really big Easter eggs as well for people. For example, I gave a preview of it on LinkedIn yesterday. We've proved that the moon landings were faked, and the evidence for the fakeness of the moon landings is in the book. Lots of sort of little mini conspiracies came up along the way, and everything's connected, it appears. So the book takes readers on a journey through human identity over time and space, and it arrives at a conclusion at the end, and the conclusion is rewarding for those that finish it. It's a big book. It's 450 pages, non-fiction as well, so it's it's a big book in size and length. But for me, it was really important that it wasn't just a book full of text, because I'm a very visual learner. So half of it is images to contextualize what I'm talking about. Complex topics can become very simple with the power of an image. A photo says 1,000 words, and some of them I've illustrated myself. So it's a lovingly crafted book, and it's in no way a hard read, but it is nonetheless a lot of information in there.
What is the meaning of tortuous interference?
So tortuous interference is when you intentionally aggravate a situation for illegal means. This is relating to the CEO of HSBC Group, Noel Quinn, who never met me. I've never met him, nor he me, never spoken to him. But I sent him my Project Speak Up report, and along with a message imploring him to take action and do the right thing. And instead, he had me constructively dismissed. And not only that, but after I left the bank, he then contacted my new employer and had them cancel my offered job contract. So he really, if I'm looking at the laws he's broken here, he's broken about 7 laws, 4 acts of parliament for our democratically elected parliament, and yet he's still able to be the CEO of HSBC Group. And this is just my case. So if he's doing this so whimsically with someone he's never met, imagine what he's doing to loads of other people. It's extraordinary that we allow such behavior from the people that lead our largest public firms.
I agree. What is the meaning of multiple whistleblower retaliations?
So I'm under the Public Disclosure Act. I'm a protected whistleblower, someone making a declaration in the public interest to a competent authority, and I'm protected in law from retaliation from anyone, and those protections go beyond the Equality Act. Doing so, becoming a whistleblower, is meant to give you the protection of the state. Unfortunately, the state isn't protecting anyone, so I have to sit here and bass off every sodding, attack that I get from these people. And the attacks are relentless. I'm unemployable. No one will pay me. No press will cover me because HSBC threatened them to pull all advertising spending if they mention me, including the FT, the BBC, and all this. So the protections obviously aren't doing very well, but the law is still clear. If you attack a whistleblower for making a disclosure in the public interest, the penalties are meant to be very severe.
What is a negative performance review?
So that was the CEO of the new company I was going to move to be global head of sales and customer service contacted Noel Quinn for a personal reference, which is a very extraordinary and unusual approach. Normally, you write to the HR team of the applicant's last employer, and they send you a sort of a standard reference. This guy went to Noel Quinn, someone who's never met me or spoken to me, who gave a negative review, obviously, because he was annoyed at Project Speak Up, and that ultimately led to the termination of my offered contract. That is illegal. It is illegal to provide a negative review, certainly one that is defamatory, and one that is not grounded in truth.
Wow.
No wonder we're in a recession all the time, because these guys just can't do a single thing legal.
No, and there was a man on telly the other day who was interviewed. He works for a bank. I'm not sure which bank it was. And he was being asked about the recession and how it was affecting people. And he said, to my shock, that, people are fine. Even when they increase the mortgage, they do find the money to pay. Who was he talking about? He wasn't talking about me. I'm not. Where am I finding the money from?
No one is fine. If you ask any bank what the purpose of money is, they'll give you 3 reasons. It's a unit of account, medium of exchange, and a store of value. If you look up the definitions of those, you'll realize it's none of those things. It's so a store of value means it's an asset that never depreciates. Actually, if you look at the Big Mac index, it's a liability that never appreciates. It's lost 50. All the major currencies lost 50% of value in the last 20 years. Is it a unit of account? That means that it's legally convertible into another asset. It is not. Money is not legally convertible into any other asset. It's built entirely on trust. Just look at what happened at Northern Rock or Credit Suisse. And the account, store of account, unit of account, and a measure of intrinsic value. It doesn't measure intrinsic value. No one's ever seen money. Notes, checks, credit cards, debit cards. These things are all how they are payment types. How if you look on a banknote, it says I promise to pay money. It's not actually money. No one's ever seen money. Money is a social construct, and therefore it doesn't exist. If you look in a bank vault, you'll see what money is, because all the bank vaults are empty. HSBC sold the Midland Bank Vault in 2016, the one from Goldfinger, if anyone's a James Bond fan. It was Fort Knox. The set for Fort Knox was the Midland Bank Vault in London. That was sold off as superfluous because they'd sold all their gold. There's no need to have gold now. We have money now, except the vault's empty. So it's not a unit of it's not a measure of intrinsic value, because 0 is 0. It's not divisible, fungible, or measurable. So unfortunately, money will always get less and less value, be devalued forever, and it means all of us will never be able to afford what we can today ever again. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse until someone does something about it. So the book explains the workings of money as well.
Oh no, I know. It's everything I've asked you just now is from your book. So you can see that I did try and scan
it's amazing. It's a big book. It's only just come out, so I never expected you to have read it, but you've done loads of homework. It's so lovely being on the show. If people want to check out the book, The Sciences of Change, it's available in 170 countries now. It's in hardback, paperback, ebook. You can search for it on Amazon, or you can go to our website, www.delightful, DEILIGHTFUL.com. And look up the Sciences of Change tab. A real labor of love for me, and a gift to everyone that would read it. It gives you all the cheat codes for getting around the system, and hopefully if we all work together, we can actually use this foundings to crack racism, sexism, and ageism, and all those isms, and let's give it a try.
Yes. And even health. People, the people who have, for some health reason or other, would prefer to work from home and not be mingling with people, unless companies know that COVID is not real, then they can drag you in. But if COVID is real, why are they forcing people to come into offices and work? And people are constantly catching this illness, whether it's the COVID or whether it's a mega flu or whatever it is, only God knows. But it's just strange. The world has become very evil and mean, and management is really mean in all aspects of work, not just your bank. It's everywhere.
I agree. So the book looks a bit like that. So I see hatred a bit like a pandemic. It spreads from person to person. It gets worse and worse over time. It's infectious. Someone's hateful to you, unless you've got strong coping mechanisms, you can actually become the thing that's upset you. So where's the reaction? Where's the global response to hatred, like we had with COVID? There is none. But they did.
Unless they vaccinate you against hatred as well, which is something. It's going to be a new concept, it's crazy. But hurt people, and so you're hurting someone who then retaliates with more hurt to somebody else, and it's a vicious circle.
There's a page in the book called the alignment infographic, and it's my favorite page because it explains that process of how you can be walking around in the street, trying to help other people thrive, and suddenly someone will come and attack you and go, you black, gay, lesbian, whatever, and then they just disappear, and you're like, oh, that was so horrible. And then you can choose. I think the point you were making, you can either choose to manifest it's nothing to do with me, it's their problem, I'm going to be fine. Or it can become deeply traumatic for you, and you can set up the anti-racism, anti-sexism campaign group, and you lose your human identity. Then you now put yourself in a box, and that's when you start to see other people as an outgroup, and that's when you become vulnerable to hatred. So we looked a lot at the dynamics of how that process works that triggers dehumanization. The tools for success. The nickname I've given this book is the book that changes everything, but it only works if people read it. So I've plugged it enough now.
I think you should read this book. You can take the book and treat it like an encyclopedia, if you like, because you can read his life story, which is it's got pictures of him, his family, everyone's in it. And then apart from that, you can start reading and trying to educate yourself. And he did say there are cheat codes in it. And so it teaches you how to deal with certain situations where, should you face them? And, it gives you ideas, and it even empowers you in a way, I think, because it makes you start thinking, oh, have I taken crap for so long? I really should buck up now, that sort of thing. And sometimes you do take crap, but what about your children? Are you going to let this cycle carry on? People had to struggle. There were fights. People died to get us to where we are now. So we need to do something. I think we are a generation of people who have just taken everything lying down. We really should stand up and buck up. I think
a lot of people have lost faith that truth exists, and if it does, they don't think it can ever be reconstituted, and they've lost faith that anything will ever change, forgetting that any of us can create change if we become determined. So the book is written to a legal and scientific standard. It has fully cited evidence to a scientific standard. And if you've ever been affected by hatred, for example, if you're facing discrimination at work, or your child's being bullied at school, or you can't access certain services because of your protected characteristics, you can literally just file a lawsuit and take a copy of the book in, and it's got all the evidence you need to win your case in there. So that was really the criteria for me. The success criteria for me is, can I write a book that any person in the world can walk into a courtroom with, and they won't need anything else to prove their case? And I think that this is that book. Remains to be seen. A big claim.
Well, yeah, we're all going to read this book, and I'm going to make my people read this book. And I think we all need to look at the areas where we can protect, if not us, because we're past that stage, our children even. Because racism and sexism and all of these isms are not going to go away until we do something about it. We have to do so. We can't let them, the perpetrators, do anything about it. They're comfortable. They're fine. They will carry on like this until they start getting reminded that it's a dangerous precedent that you're setting, if you carry on in this way. Do you know, we have done 52 minutes when we were supposed to do 45.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's fine. It means we have had a good discussion where there were no gaps, there were no pauses, and in fact, we could have carried on, but it's just time that's stopping us. We have to do this again. I think you need to write a second book. And I want to thank you so much for coming on. And you've opened our mind. I am actually... one of the reasons why you could be somebody's son, you could be somebody's nephew, you could be somebody's brother, you could be somebody's anything, and you have everyone needs to have listened to you to realize that there are human interests, human issues, real issues. You've given your story and you've given examples, and we all need to start thinking about this whole discussion. And one of these days you must come back after you've written your second book so that we talk some more about it. I'm going to plug your book even after the show because I've read it bits of it, but I haven't read it fully. But even the amount that I've read really made me kind of think, oh my God, I did a lot of oh my gods in that book. So thank you for coming. Thank you, listeners, for
thank you so much,
staying with us. Yes, for, you know, and somebody says a very engaging discussion. Somebody says, I agree with you. The world has become evil, but you can read all that on, you know, I wanted to put your company information on there, and I mistakenly put your information on there. So I have to delete that and redo it. So if you give me something, I will put it in the chat section on YouTube. But this was going to be on telly as well. So if you have Sky, people, it's going to be on channel 7. So you can watch it there. Thank you, Ian. You stay, but I'm about to switch the broadcast off. Thank you
so much for having me.
I'm continually grateful to my people who always come on live and listen to it. Thank you. Bye-bye. Yes, Ian.